He parked the car at the edge of the town that once erased him. Mapleton looked the same, its main street lined with white porches and faded flagpoles. The scent of pine mixed with gasoline. The same old gas station where boys once carved initials into the pump handles like promises. But for Jesse Whitaker, coming back here wasn't nostalgia. It was unfinished business. Years ago, he left this town under the weight of silence. No one screamed at him. No fists were thrown. Just one moment, a kiss behind the school gym, and the next morning, he was no longer someone's nephew, grandson, or student. He was simply gone. They made it seem like he vanished by choice, but he remembered everything. The way his Uncle Raymond looked at him when the news spread, the silence in church when his name was skipped in the prayer list, and the letter from his school, requesting his discreet withdrawal. Mapleton had its way of cleansing things it didn't understand. And yet, here he was, with Leo's hand resting gently on the gear shift, steady like a compass. Jesse had chosen to come back for one reason: to marry the man he loved. Right here, where he was once told love like his didn't belong. They could have married anywhere else. Leo had offered New York, Portland, even a quiet vineyard in Oregon. But Jesse had said no. He wanted this land, the one passed down from his father and his father's father. A land soaked in legacy, in judgment, and maybe redemption. Planning the wedding in Mapleton wasn't just a decision, it was a confrontation. He called the county office and requested a permit to hold a wedding on the family plot. There was a long pause on the other end before the clerk said she'd have to ask around. When they dropped off the invitation at the local bakery, the owner gently refused. "I'm just not comfortable," she said. Eyes lowered to the countertop. Jesse nodded. He expected it, but that didn't mean it didn't bruise. At night, he would walk the gravel roads around the old house his grandmother still kept tidy. Fireflies blinked like questions in the dark, and he'd wonder if he was foolish for wanting recognition from people who once pretended he didn't exist. But every time he looked at Leo, calm and certain, even under the weight of other people's discomfort, Jesse remembered the purpose of their return. It wasn't just about a ceremony, it was about reclaiming a space that once made him feel ashamed to exist. Not by screaming or demanding or even educating, but by showing up, by standing in the sun, next to the man he loved, in the town that tried to keep him in the dark. And still, when, in the quiet corners of Mapleton, the whispers began. Some said it was a disgrace. Others said it was time. And one old man at the barbershop simply muttered, "He's back." But Jesse wasn't just back. He was becoming history. And have you ever returned to a place that broke you, just to prove you never stayed broken? Share your story in the comments. If this story moved you, leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Heart Stories for more tales that heal the invisible scars. The morning light slipped through the curtains in soft gold, casting long shadows over the wooden floor of Jesse's childhood bedroom. The walls, once covered in posters of baseball players and science fair ribbons, were now bare, stripped of any memory that had dared to linger. It felt like a museum of a boy who no longer existed, and maybe in this town. Jesse was up early, not from nerves, but from something quieter, heavier. In the kitchen, his grandmother Clara hummed as she stirred oatmeal, like she always did. Her voice trembled now with age, but her eyes still held a sharpness. She had been the only one to welcome them back. She didn't ask questions. She just made the bed and swept the porch. But that morning, something pulled Jesse to the attic. A small urge, irrational and sudden, like a thread tugging at the sleeve of his past. He hadn't been up there in over a decade. The air was stale, filled with dust and silence. But in the corner, beneath an old army trunk, was a wooden box. Jesse opened it with hesitation. Inside were letters, dozens of them, yellowing and bound with ribbon. The handwriting was unmistakable. They were from his mother, letters he never received. His hands shook as he unfolded the first one. "My Jesse," it began. "I know what they told me to believe. But I remember your eyes when you were a baby. You have always loved purely. That could never be wrong. Some letters pleaded with Raymond to let her see Jessie. Others begged forgiveness for what she couldn't stop. But all of them, every page had been hidden. It wasn't time or death that severed the bond between Jessie and his mother. It was a decision, a boundary drawn not by love, but by power. When Jessie confronted his grandmother, her face fell. "He told me it was better for you," she whispered. "Said your mother was sick with confusion. Said you'd be better off forgetting." The betrayal stung deeper than any insult. His uncle had not just disapproved of who he was, he had rewritten Jessie's story, erased a mother's love to control a nephew's shame. That night, Jessie sat with Leo under the backyard tree. He read one of the letters aloud, voice cracking halfway through. Leo said nothing. He didn't have to. His presence was the kind Jessie had longed for, someone who listened without fixing, who held space without shrinking from the pain. Leo suggested they confront Raymond. "Not for revenge," he said, "but so you can stand in front of him as you are, now whole and unafraid." But Jessie hesitated. Part of him still carried that quiet, desperate need for belonging. Not from friends or strangers, from blood, and even after everything. Some part of him still wondered if there was something left to save. Instead, he wrote a letter. It was short, just a few lines, written in steady ink. "You told this family to forget me, but I remember. I remember my mother. I remember the boy I was. And I remember who took that away. My wedding is at noon. You're not invited because you gave up that right. But if you show up, I won't send you away. Not for me, but for her." He left it at the church office, folded neatly with his name on the front. Then he walked home in silence, the kind that only exists when truth has been spoken aloud. The next morning, Clara stood beside Jessie as he adjusted his tie. She looked at him through the mirror and said, "Your mother would have worn blue today. She always believed blue brought blessings." Jessie nodded, swallowing back the tears. There was no blessing from the church, no blessing from the man who raised him. But there was truth now, and the truth had its own quiet grace. The sky held its breath that morning. Clouds hung low but refused to break, as if the heavens themselves were uncertain of what kind of day this would be. Jessie stood on the back lawn of his grandmother's house, his family's land for 4 generations. Today, it would hold something Mapleton had never seen: the wedding of 2 men. Rows of white chairs curved gently beneath the oak tree. The altar was simple, framed with wildflowers picked by Clara the night before. But the seats? They were mostly empty. He had prepared himself for it. He had told Leo not to hope too much. But still, the emptiness stung. The guest list had been modest, out of caution. Old college friends, a few co-workers from Leo's architecture firm. Maya, the young teacher Jessie had once mentored online, now grown and radiant, flew in from Chicago. She brought her girlfriend and a small rainbow flag that she tucked into the grass behind their chairs. But of the Whitakers, none came. Raymond didn't respond to the letter. Neither did the cousins, the aunts, the family friends who once shared peach cobbler on Sundays and sat beside him in church pews. Jessie adjusted his cufflinks with steady hands. They had belonged to his father. He had found them buried deep in a box of medals and faded photos. There were no letters from his father, only silence, like the kind passed down through generations when feelings were too fragile to speak. The officiant, an older woman named Meredith, who had performed interfaith ceremonies across the state, stood ready. She smiled gently, the kind of smile that said, "I've seen love in 1,000 forms, and this one is no less sacred." Leo walked toward him. He wore a navy suit with a slim rainbow pin tucked beneath his lapel, understated but defiant. His steps were calm, his eyes certain. He had trimmed his beard that morning, not for appearances, but because he said every new beginning deserves something clean. As the ceremony began, Jessie's breath caught, not from nerves but from grief. He realized then that what hurt most wasn't rejection. It was the knowledge that somewhere just a few blocks away, his family was likely gathered in silence, maybe pretending this wasn't happening, maybe talking about weather, or pretending not to care. When Meredith asked Jesse if he was take Leo as his partner in life, Jesse said yes, but the word carried more than consent. It was defiance. It was memory. It was a vow made not just to Leo Bicot, but to himself that he would no longer wait for others to define what love was worth showing up for. And just as the rings were exchanged, something shifted in the air. A car door slammed in the distance. Then another. A group of people stood at the edge of the field. Jesse blinked, unsure if the sunlight had tricked him, but they stepped closer. It was Henry Raymond's younger brother, long estranged, who had vanished decades ago after coming out himself. And beside him, Julia, Jesse's cousin, once too afraid to respond to texts. Behind them, two more chairs filled, then three, then five. None of them made a scene. They simply sat down. Jesse's hands trembled. Henry stepped forward once the ceremony closed and asked quietly if he could say something. He turned to the small crowd, to Jesse, to Leo. His voice cracked from disuse. I left this town when I was 17 because I was told I loved wrong. I missed weddings, funerals, my mother's last breath. I came today because I won't miss another chance to witness love in my own bloodline. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a handkerchief blue silk, frayed at the edges. Your mother gave me this the day I left, he said. She told me there'll be a day this town will have to learn again what grace looks like. I think that day is today. Jesse didn't cry, not because he wasn't moved, but because something stronger was rising in his chest. It was peace. Not the kind you earn from winning, but the kind that arrives quietly when you stop needing permission to exist. He took Leo's hand as the sun broke through the clouds, and for the first time in his life, Jesse felt like Mapleton saw him, not as a stain, or a whisper, or a mistake to be hidden, but as a groom, as a man, as someone finally home. The wedding was over, but its echoes lingered in the soil, in the air, in the silence that followed after the chairs were folded and the guests had gone. For days, Jesse kept waking before the sun, not because he was restless, but because his body didn't yet know how to live without waiting for a blow that never came. The ceremony hadn't just gone peacefully, it had been beautiful, tender, real. But the letter had never come back. Raymond didn't show up. No phone call, no acknowledgement. Jesse told himself he had made peace with that. But the part of him that used to crave his uncle's approval, that small, stubborn piece, remained quiet, not yet convinced it had been fully freed. Then came the call. 3 days after the wedding, Clara picked up the phone in the hallway and turned to Jesse with eyes heavy. It's the hospital, she said. Raymond. He had suffered a minor stroke. The doctor said he would recover, but the road ahead would be slow. Jesse stood still, his hand frozen on the staircase banister. He didn't say a word. Leo waited until they were alone before asking gently, Will you go? Jesse didn't answer right away. He had spent so much of his life looking away from the pain this man caused, and now, when he had finally learned to walk without it, he was being asked to face it one more time, not with confrontation, but with compassion. He drove alone to the hospital the next morning. The hall smelled like antiseptic and wilted flowers. Raymond lay in a bed by the window, smaller than Jesse remembered. His face was pale, eyes closed, a faint tremor in his right hand. On the table beside him was a folder. Jesse sat down and opened it without asking. Inside was a printed speech, dated the week before the wedding. It was titled For My Nephew. The words were shaky, handwritten in parts, but clear. I was raised to believe that certain things could not be spoken, let alone celebrated. But belief is not truth, and silence has done far more damage in this family than honesty ever could. Jesse, I do not know how to love you the way I should have, but I want you to know if I could go back, I would have stood up that day. I would have said, you are not a shame. You are not an exception. You are my blood, and that is enough. Jess stared at the paper, unsure whether it healed or hurt more. It was not an apology. It was not redemption. But it was something. A crack in the wall that had divided them for so long. He folded the paper neatly and placed it back. Raymond's eyes opened slowly. He looked at Jesse, not with hostility or warmth, but with age, with something like surrender. They didn't speak much. Jesse told him the wedding had gone well, that the weather held, that people had shown up. Raymond blinked slowly, as if those simple facts were too much to bear. Before leaving, Jesse stood and adjusted the thin blanket at the edge of the bed. Then he turned and said, quietly, I didn't come here for forgiveness. I came here because I needed to look you in the eye and say, I'm not angry anymore. But I won't forget. I can't. And you may never understand what you took from me. But I hope someday you'll understand what I gave back to myself. He left without waiting for a response. Back home, Leo was in the garden, planting bluebells along the path leading to the back porch. Jesse joined him, dropping to his knees in the dirt. For a while, they said nothing, just hands in soil, sweat and breath, two men building something together. Clara brought them lemonade, and Maya sent a photo of the wedding frame she had crafted, a picture of Jesse and Leo under the oak, sunlight breaking through the branches like grace. Jesse stared at it for a long time before whispering, more to himself than anyone else. I don't need them to bless me anymore. We built this without permission. And somehow that made it holy. Months passed, and the land slowly forgot the footprints of the wedding day. The petals withered. The chairs returned to storage. But something in Mapleton had shifted quietly, like the seasons, like healing often does. Jesse and Leo didn't leave after the ceremony. They stayed, not because it was easy, but because it felt necessary. There was something redemptive about planting roots in the same place others once tried to cut you down. They restored the family home, room by room, repainted the porch, and turned the attic into a small studio where Jesse could draw again. Leo designed a garden, where lavender now bloomed beside Clara's rose bushes, and a small bench stood beneath the oak where they had once said their vows. At first, people avoided eye contact in town. Some crossed the street, some offered a stiff nod at the grocery store, but others lingered a second longer. One woman left a pie on the porch with a note that simply read, "Welcome back." A teenager from the high school sent Jesse a message on Instagram, thanking him for being brave out loud. The boy didn't sign his name. He didn't have to. A month later, Jesse was invited to speak at the local library's youth forum. It was the same building where he once won a spelling bee in 4th grade, the same place where his name had been quietly removed from the wall of honor after he left. He stood on that stage, heart steady, voice clear. He didn't talk about trauma or rejection. He talked about love, about choosing to stay soft in a world that tells you to armor up, about building a home not from wood or walls, but from people who stay, even when it's hard. That evening, he walked home past the church where his uncle had once preached. The lights were off. A for sale sign hung on the front gate. He stopped, unsure what he felt. Not victory, not relief, just stillness. Clara passed away that winter. She had lived long enough to witness the family name mean something else, something kinder. In her will, she left Jesse and Leo the house, with a small note written in her shaky handwriting. Don't leave this place. Let it grow around you. In her memory, Jesse and Leo founded a local scholarship named after her and Jesse's mother, awarded each year to students in the county who showed resilience in the face of exclusion. The first recipient was a young girl who dreamed of becoming a poet. The second, a boy who loved math and musical theater in equal measure. Every June, on the anniversary of their wedding, Jesse and Leo hosted a backyard gathering. Nothing fancy, just neighbors, friends, laughter, music. Some of the same people who once looked away now brought casseroles and paper plates. Henry, the uncle who had returned, helped string up lights in the trees. He never missed a year. On the third anniversary, something unexpected arrived in the mail. It was a letter. The return address was from a care home 2 towns over. The handwriting was rigid, barely legible, but Jesse knew it instantly. You were right, the letter read. You didn't come for forgiveness, and I never asked for it. But I hope if there's still time you can believe this. I stayed away, not out of hate, but out of fear. And you proved that love can live without permission. I didn't teach you that, but I hope I finally learned it from you. It was signed, simply. Raymond Jesse didn't reply. He folded the letter and placed it in a frame beside their wedding photo. It wasn't closure, it didn't erase anything, but it was a full circle, and that was enough. Their story didn't end with a wedding. It began with it, because some vows are not just between two people, but between who we were and who we choose to become. Have you ever built something beautiful in the same place you were once broken? Tell us what you reclaimed quietly, powerfully, in your own way. If this story touched you, give it a like, share it with someone finding their way back to themselves, and subscribe to Heart Stories for more stories that light the path home.